Tyler Perry was once praised as a hero, a man who went from living in his car to owning the biggest Black-owned film studio in the United States. People looked at him as proof that dreams could come true, especially for those who were told they didn't belong in Hollywood. He was the man behind emotional stories that many felt touched their souls. But you won't believe what's now coming out. The same empire that inspired millions has slowly started to crack. And at the center of this shocking unraveling is someone no one expected, Janet Jackson. Yes, that Janet. The queen of pop, the icon known for her silence, finally spoke up. And what she exposed about Tyler Perry left everyone stunned. Let me tell you, this wasn't just another celebrity comment. This wasn't about gossip or drama. Janet's words cut deep, and they came with a truth that many had whispered for years but were too scared to say out loud. For a long time, Tyler Perry was seen as untouchable. He built his name through gospel-themed storytelling and Christian values, winning over the hearts of Black audiences everywhere. But what if I told you that behind the scenes, there were whispers of control, fear, and silenced voices? That's exactly what has started to come out. And now those whispers are becoming louder every day. It all started with a single interview. Janet Jackson was asked a simple question about working with Tyler Perry again. At first, she gave the usual polite response. She said she respected him as a businessman. But then her tone shifted. And this is where it gets interesting. Janet looked down, paused, and then said something that made everyone stop in their tracks. At some point, pain can't just be recycled and rebranded as empowerment. That one sentence, it lit a fire online. Fans rushed to break it down. What did she mean? Was she calling out Perry for the way he writes Black women? The answer, it turns out, was yes. Janet had worked with Tyler on several major films, including Why Did I Get Married and For Colored Girls. At the time, people praised the partnership. Two powerful Black icons coming together for what looked like inspiring projects. But here's the shocking part. Behind those smiling red carpet photos was a working relationship that had started to fall apart. Insiders said Janet wasn't happy with the way her character Patricia was written. In the movie, Patricia suffered a tragic loss, was emotionally broken, and had no real healing. Janet had reportedly asked for changes to the script, hoping to show more depth and growth, but Tyler didn't allow it. And it didn't stop there. During the filming of For Colored Girls, Janet and other actresses like Thandie Newton and Whoopi Goldberg had serious concerns. They felt that the film strayed from the original play and pushed women into painful roles without balance or hope. Janet, always professional in public, kept her feelings quiet, but according to people close to her, she was emotionally drained. Playing back-to-back roles full of trauma with no healing in sight took a toll on her. She started to ask herself, was this art helping people or just showing their suffering? This is where the story takes a turn most people didn't see coming. You see, Janet didn't just speak for herself. According to sources, she had talked to other Black women in Hollywood who had worked with or auditioned for Tyler Perry. And the pattern she saw disturbed her. Over and over again, the same stories came up. Tight control, no room for creative feedback, and roles that left Black women feeling broken, angry, or abused. That's when Janet made her final decision. She would no longer attach herself to those kinds of stories. Quietly, without a big announcement, she stepped away from Tyler Perry's projects. And now, years later, she was finally ready to explain why. What makes this story different? It's not just about one woman speaking out, it's about a shift, a turning point. For years, fans, especially Black women, supported Tyler Perry's work, hoping to see themselves reflected in it. But Janet's words hit a nerve because they confirmed something many had already started to feel, that these stories weren't always empowering. They were heavy, they were painful, and sometimes they seemed to glorify suffering instead of healing it. The craziest part, Tyler Perry claimed that Many of his female characters were based on his mother, a woman who endured abuse but stayed loyal and God-fearing. But critics now say that maybe his lens was too clouded by his own trauma to see Black women in their full beauty and strength. As the firestorm around Tyler Perry's empire continued to grow, more voices began stepping out of the shadows. Janet Jackson's carefully chosen words didn't just stir the surface, they cracked it wide open. And what followed next revealed an even deeper pattern that had quietly existed for years. You see, Janet wasn't alone in her feelings. While she may have been the most high-profile figure to speak, others had been trying to sound the alarm long before. Only they were ignored, dismissed, or worse, punished. And this is how the illusion of perfection began to fall apart. One of the most powerful voices to echo Janet's concerns was none other than Mo'Nique. You remember her, Oscar-winning actress, beloved for her raw, emotional performance in Precious? But what many didn't know was the storm she had to face behind closed doors. After Precious, Mo'Nique was expected to promote the film across the globe. Interviews, events, press runs, all unpaid. She refused, standing on principle. And guess who was at the center of the backlash she received? Tyler Perry. According to Mo'Nique, he called her privately to say she was right, but publicly, he stayed silent. Let me tell you, that silence cut deeper than any public statement could. Mo'Nique felt abandoned, especially by someone who had built his empire on supposedly uplifting Black women. In an emotional interview, she said, "Tyler, you called me and said I was right, but you didn't stand up for me." That moment became a turning point, not just for her, but for every artist who had been told to stay quiet for the sake of unity or the culture. Mo'Nique wasn't trying to tear anyone down. She was asking for respect, for fairness, and most of all, for someone like Tyler to practice what he preached. And that's when more critics began to speak. Spike Lee, known for his boldness and no-filter honesty, once described Tyler Perry's work as coonery and buffoonery. Now, that may sound harsh, but his point was simple. He believed that Perry's characters, especially the men in drag and the emotionally unstable women, relied too heavily on old, damaging stereotypes. Spike wasn't attacking Tyler as a man. He was challenging the impact of the content. Was Perry truly helping the Black community by showing them like this, or was he feeding a system that profited from pain? But here's the shocking part. Tyler didn't just brush off the criticism, he doubled down. He told his audience that his stories were about real people, real struggles. But critics argued back. Real struggles deserve real depth, not surface-level trauma, not exaggerated pain, and certainly not a lack of healing. And when you look closer, you'll see something that raised even more eyebrows. Tyler Perry famously wrote every single one of his scripts by himself. No writer's room, no feedback loop, no second opinion. This is where it gets interesting. In 2008, a group of writers from his television shows, including House of Pain, tried to unionize. They weren't asking for anything outrageous, just fair treatment and benefits. Instead of listening, Perry allegedly fired them all. Just like that, gone. He later claimed he didn't know about the unionizing efforts, but the damage was done. And it sent a clear message. This was a one-man show, and anyone who questioned it could be replaced. Even actors who worked closely with Perry started to speak out, though carefully. Tasha Smith, who played Angela in Why Did I Get Married, mentioned in interviews how little control actors had over their roles. She eventually stepped behind the camera to direct and produce, where she openly created collaborative environments. That shift wasn't random. It was her quiet way of saying, it doesn't have to be this way. More and more, it became clear that behind the scenes of Tyler Perry Studios, there was little room for anyone's voice but his own. And that's when people really started connecting the dots. Perry's empire wasn't just about content, it was about control. And when you own the studio, fund the projects, and write every word, you also control the narrative. No one checks you, no one corrects you. and no one can call you out unless they're brave enough to risk it all. But the craziest part, that silence from others had less to do with fear of Tyler himself and more to do with the fact that he held the keys to opportunity. For many Black actors and creators, getting a role in a Tyler Perry project meant visibility, a paycheck, and sometimes even a breakthrough. But at what cost? Janet's story, Monique's experience, the fired writers, the quiet frustrations from actors, they all pointed to a pattern of silence, of emotional pressure, and of choosing loyalty over truth. So now with Janet breaking that silence, a ripple effect had begun. Suddenly, the media wasn't just celebrating Tyler Perry's rags to riches story. As the storm around Tyler Perry's name kept growing, so did the number of people starting to see his empire in a new light. What once looked like a shining example of Black excellence now seemed more like a tightly controlled kingdom where every story had to go through one man and every challenge was shut down quietly. And this is how the story took an even darker turn. You won't believe how far this pattern actually went, especially when it came to the way Perry wrote his most loyal audience, Black women. For more than 2 decades, Perry's biggest supporters had been Black women, especially church-going older women who saw themselves in his stories. They were the ones filling theaters, watching his plays, and streaming his movies. In return, they expected to be seen, heard, and respected in his work, but little by little, they began to notice something that didn't feel right. His female characters were almost always in pain. They were cheated on, beaten, emotionally damaged, mentally unstable, or all of the above. Over and over again, the same story played out. And fans began to ask, why does love always look like suffering in Tyler Perry's world? One of the clearest examples was the film Acrimony. Taraji P. Henson played a woman driven to madness after years of betrayal. Another was A Fall from Grace, where a kind, quiet woman was tricked, used, and broken down, only to be seen as crazy. And even in earlier works, like Diary of a Mad Black Woman, the lead character suffered humiliating abuse before being saved by a soft-spoken churchman. This repeated message became hard to ignore. A woman must suffer deeply before she can find peace. And many began to feel that Perry wasn't writing healing. He was writing pain over and over again, then wrapping it in a gospel bow. This is where it gets even more concerning. Perry often said his female characters were based on his mother, who he described as strong and God-fearing, even while trapped in an abusive marriage. But critics began to wonder, was he showing Black women as strong or just showing them as survivors of pain? Was he honoring his mother or replaying her trauma in every script? It became clear that his personal past was deeply shaping his work, but without balance, it started to feel less like storytelling and more like emotional recycling. Janet Jackson's recent comments brought this exact issue back into the spotlight. Her words weren't just about her own role, they were about the message being sent to an entire generation of women. And once she said it, many fans realized they had felt the same way for years. One comment online went viral. Tyler Perry doesn't write Black women. He writes what he thinks pain looks like on a Black woman's body. That line hit hard because for so long, people thought they were seeing their truth on screen until they realized it was someone else's version of their truth. And that version, over time, became exhausting to watch. Let me tell you, once this conversation started, it spread fast. Podcasts, blogs, TikToks, and interviews, everyone was talking about it. People began breaking down the emotional weight Perry's films placed on Black women. The suffering, the crying, the betrayal, it was always there. But where was the joy? Where was the laughter, the softness, the self-love? Why were these characters only allowed to be powerful after they had been broken first? The more people watched with open eyes, the more they started to pull away. Even other Black creatives like Ava DuVernay and Issa Rae began making subtle statements about the importance of diverse stories that don't just focus on trauma. They didn't name Perry directly, but the message was clear. Black women deserve more. They deserve to be shown in love, in success, in freedom, not just in pain and survival. Ava once said, "We need stories where Black women get to just be." That one sentence stood in complete contrast to the way Perry had built his entire body of work. And while Tyler continued to defend his vision, saying his stories were real and needed, more and more people began questioning if they were too real, if they were actually hurting the very people they were supposed to uplift. Some viewers even said they had stopped watching his films because they no longer felt seen, only pitied. What used to feel like healing now felt like a reminder of wounds that had never closed. This is where the story took an even more unexpected turn. People started to dig deeper, not just into the content of Perry's work, but into the way his empire operated. Reports of rushed filming schedules, low pay for supporting actors, and minimal collaboration began to surface. Suddenly, the polished image of Tyler Perry Studios didn't look so perfect. And with Janet Jackson opening the door, more people began to feel safe stepping forward with their own stories. Quietly, respectfully, but truthfully. Now that the floodgates had opened, the silence that once protected Tyler Perry's empire was nowhere to be found. The industry had changed. People were no longer afraid to speak up. The same man who was once untouchable, whose every project was treated like gold, was now being watched with sharper eyes. And not just by critics or insiders, but by his own audience. The very people who had supported him, believed in him, and helped build his billion-dollar legacy were now asking, has Tyler Perry truly been the voice of the people or just the voice of his own pain? This is where it got deeply personal, because for years, Tyler Perry was seen as someone who gave opportunities where Hollywood closed doors. He hired Black actors when few others would. He built sets, launched shows, and created jobs. That mattered. It still does. But here's the part they really didn't want you to hear. Good deeds don't erase toxic patterns. And now, people were beginning to separate the man from the myth. Behind the scenes, a larger conversation was forming. According to sources close to Janet Jackson, she had talked privately with other well-known Black actresses about their own uncomfortable experiences working under Perry's creative direction. These weren't casual complaints. They were emotional, honest talks about how they felt silenced, misrepresented, or simply exhausted by the kinds of roles they were asked to play. It wasn't just about art anymore. It was about emotional labor, about how repeatedly playing broken women took a toll on their spirit. Some even said that Perry's projects felt more like therapy for him than storytelling for the audience. That's a bold claim, but one that stuck. Was Tyler using his art to process his trauma while forcing others to carry the emotional weight on screen? Critics certainly thought so. And with more voices stepping into the light, it became harder to deny. Meanwhile, the younger generation of viewers had already started pulling away. They wanted stories where Black women smiled, laughed, lived fully. They wanted to see themselves in love, in joy, in softness, not just in pain and prayer. The more Perry doubled down on his old formulas, the more outdated his content began to feel. People were no longer satisfied with watching Black women cry and call it healing. They wanted real growth, real love, real freedom. And yet, despite the backlash, Tyler Perry stayed mostly silent. No real interviews, no sit-downs to address the growing criticism. Just carefully worded social media posts, vague inspiration quotes, and announcements about upcoming projects. It felt disconnected, distant, almost like he didn't see the storm building around him, or didn't care. But let me tell you, this storm wasn't passing, it was growing. And more people were watching closely to see how he'd respond. Industry insiders warned that this wasn't just a rough patch, it was a reckoning, a moment that could redefine Perry's place in Hollywood forever. Would he finally open his doors to other writers, directors, and perspectives? Would he begin to allow collaboration instead of total control? Or would he continue down the same path, even if it meant losing the audience that once saw him as a hero? Janet Jackson's comments had lit a fire, and her bravery gave others the courage to speak. Now, the question wasn't if more names would come forward, it was when. Because behind every tightly managed brand, there are stories waiting to be told. And Tyler Perry's story was no longer just about success, it was about accountability. So, where does this leave everything? Tyler Perry still owns his studio, he still has loyal fans, but the cracks in his empire are no longer hidden. The conversation has changed, and unless he listens, really listens, this could be the beginning of a full transformation, not just of his brand, but of how Black storytelling is handled in Hollywood. If you're watching this and you've ever felt inspired by Perry's work, or maybe even hurt by it, now's the time to speak. This isn't about canceling, it's about demanding better. Because the stories we tell matter, and the people behind them must be held to a higher standard, especially when they claim to speak for those who've been silenced for too long. Let us know in the comments, do you think Janet Jackson was right to speak out? Do you believe this backlash is long overdue? Or do you think Tyler Perry is just misunderstood? Drop your thoughts in tribute to Janet's courage in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in truth over silence. And hit subscribe for more deep dives into the stories they don't want you to hear.